Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Idaho is now recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield such time as he may consume to the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Latham.
Gentleman is recognized.
I thank the gentleman from Idaho, and I thank the Speaker for the recognition. Mr. Speaker, the Senate included a one-sentence provision in the 2008 omnibus spending bill requiring the EPA to develop and publish a rule that mandates the reporting of greenhouse gas emissions for all sectors of the U.S. economy. That one sentence reads, and I quote, "Of the funds provided in the environmental programs and management account, not less than $3.5 million shall be provided for activities to develop and publish a draft rule not later than 9 months after the date of enactment of this Act, and a final rule not later than 18 months after the date of enactment of this Act, to require mandatory reporting of greenhouse gas emissions above appropriate thresholds in all sectors of the economy of the United States." Mr. Speaker, this one sentence, incidentally, I will say, and I'll say again later, never had a hearing. It was snuck in this bill. That one sentence resulted in 1,302 pages, 42 volumes of regulations, and I hold here the 1,300 pages. The preamble of this regulation is 500 pages long. This is what this is, another 500 pages, so we've got 1,800 pages. And the regulatory impact analysis of more than 200 pages. Mr. Speaker, here's another 200 pages. So in total, this one sentence that was snuck in this bill has resulted in over 2,000 pages of new regulations for our country at a time that we're in a recession and people are hurting out there, and this is the cost of more government. The proposed rule generated about 17,000 comments, and according to the EPA, this rule will cost employers $115 million for the first year, and estimates about $70 million each year after that, just to comply with the new 2,000 pages here. Mr. Speaker, as a former small business owner and farmer, I would suggest these numbers are exceedingly low. And there's no estimate as to how much has already been spent by businesses trying to figure out whether or not they fall under the regulation, and if they do, how they're going to follow these new rules. Congress tucked this sentence into the appropriation bill, again without holding a single hearing. Let me reemphasize, not a single hearing goes into these 2,000 pages of regulations that are now being put on top of our economy. Consequently, the language provided no limitation or guidelines for the EPA and gave the agency unlimited authority to draft the new rule. The EPA did its job. 1,300 pages in regulations are a testament to the Congress using the Appropriations Committee to shortcut the authorizing committee process. The language we're debating today impacts the livestock industry. Within these 1,300 pages, the regulation requires the reporting of greenhouse gases from animal agriculture, which on the surface seems harmless enough. However, I want to stress that this regulation has a cost, and more importantly, it will do nothing to improve the environmental health of rural America. It doesn't make manure lagoons smell any better. It doesn't protect water wells or native species. It doesn't do one thing to improve the standard of living in rural Iowa or any part of this country. It has, however, improved the standard of living of people in metropolitan Washington, D.C., because this one sentence has kept a bunch of folks, a bunch of good bureaucrats at EPA busy for the last year and a half. Farmers work very hard, day to day, to try and preserve their environment, from learning how to keep their topsoil from washing away to improving the quality of our water to eliminating odor and turning waste products into energy. The health of the environment is critically important to the success of a farming operation. American farmers have done a great job finding ways to protect the environment without sacrificing their family's income. But at a time when our nation's farmers are facing some of the most difficult economic times in the last decade, we are introducing new and costly federal mandates. This regulation will generate additional input costs for an industry that can ill afford it. Dairy has lost about $12 billion in milk receipts from 2008-2009, about a 33% loss. Pork, a loss of about $2 billion or 10% in receipts for hogs, and the industry is expected to lose another $800 million this year. Cattle lost about $5 billion or 10% of its receipts, and poultry producers are going bankrupt. If you're in livestock today, you're losing money. The EPA estimates the cost of reporting will be $900 per facility. However, one instrument used to measure methane can cost about $15,000 and requires trained personnel to maintain, which adds further cost. So these farmers are going to have to hire an expert to sit there and monitor the machines. And to me, that adds up to a little more than $900 per facility. To add further cost to production is simply foolish and irresponsible on the part of this Congress. This language should have never been added to a spending bill. That's why we have an authorizing committee and why members representing agriculture are concerned about this climate change legislation. You think about it, one sentence tucked into an appropriation bill generated 1,300 pages of regulations, 500 pages of preamble, 200 pages of a regulatory impact analysis, and that regulates all sectors of the economy, and agriculture just being a small slice. We have cap and trade bills that have thousands of pages of legislative language alone that members of Congress want signed into law. This Congress intends to give EPA a huge increase in spending this year, and I guess they're going to need it. Why? Because the EPA is going to have to hire a heck of a lot of new people to write those regulations, and regulations with equations like this have real costs to our economy. Let me just show you what this regulation looks like. And it's true, this is why farmers love Washington. When you have a paragraph that puts one of the formulas in these regulations that farmers have to comply with. And let me just read. It says, for all manure management systems components listed in 98.360 subsection B except digesters, estimate the annual CH4 emissions and the sum of all the components to obtain total emissions from the manure management system for all animal types using equation JJ1. Well, this is equation JJ1. You figure it out. We're going to have a bunch of mathematicians on the farm along with the EPA apparently. The regulation as written is onerous. The cost and scope is in serious question, and agriculture cannot afford another federal mandate on this economy. Manure management is a serious issue. I know, I grew up and I live in Iowa, but this rule does nothing, and I emphasize again nothing, to improve the way farmers manage their manure. Ladies and gentlemen, we stand up here every day and talk about the economic problems outside the Beltway and how much we want to work to provide assistance. When will it dawn on us that here in Washington we are part of that problem? Washington mandates costs on a daily basis, whether on farmers who feed us or our constituents in low-income areas who have to pay more hard-earned dollars each month to cover the cost of our well-intentioned handiwork. We need to think about the impacts. A couple of hundred here, 1,000 here, a couple hundred million over there, and pretty soon our employers are struggling to keep up with the government-generated cost of living increases. I ask my colleagues to please support this motion to instruct. It is absolutely critical, not only in agriculture, but for our constituents back home. And again, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the time, and I yield back the balance.
Mr. Speaker,
Gentleman from Washington, recognized.